In SketchUp, as in the shop, chairs can offer some interesting challenges with all their angled parts, and this Adirondack chair is a good example of that. Placing the backrest slats in these curves at the angle that's created here seems like it would be a very difficult thing to do, but it really isn't if you take an ordered approach to that. In this particular case, the two pieces I've got selected here, these supports for the backrest, their positions are determined by the back legs and these vertical supports, and they actually will give us a surprising amount of information here for how that needs to work. So there are those parts, and we're going to use those in a moment, but let me first create a new slat for the back, and I'm just going to drag out a rectangle and give it some dimensions. It's I'm drawing it slightly oversized for length, and at its full width at the top we'll just use push-pull, make it 3/4 of an inch, and now I'm going to make this a component, and so I'll hit the G key and I'm going to give it a name, call it a new back slat since I already have an old back slat in here. And before I complete making the component, I'm going to click on the Set Component Axes. Could do this after the fact, but it's maybe a little faster to do it now. And I'm going to set this component's origin right at the midpoint at the back edge and at the bottom. And I'll drag along the bottom edge here, and then I'll come out on, it says on green axis, which tells me it's parallel to the green axis. And I'll click there, and then I'll go ahead and click Create. So the idea here is that I've got an insertion point where the origin is that's right there at the bottom, and that's going to make it a little easier to place that thing. One other thing that I'm going to do before I move on is I'm going to taper the slat. And I know that the bottom of this thing is 2 inches wide and the top is 2 7/8, so I'll take 7/16 off of both sides by selecting that edge and then just using the move tool and moving it in 7/16. That's a pretty slick way to do it. You don't need to see the whole slat to be able to get her done. And there we go. Now, just a couple of notes. There are some folks who prefer to use groups, and if you do use a group for this, you won't have the option to set the group's insertion point, and you won't be able to do the next thing I'm going to do, and that is, well, you'll be able to do this. You can delete it, but I'll bring it back later. Now I'm going to, actually, let's turn on our hidden geometry, and then I'm going to find the midpoint of the arc for this top part, and come down to the midpoint in the arc on the bottom. That line gives me, don't really need this line. We could do this without it, but I think it's easier to show you with that line. That's the line that the back slat needs to rest on. And what I'll do is I'm going to zoom in here close so you can see this, and I'm going to bring in the components thing, and let's find that new back slat component. It's right there, and I've got the insertion point. I can just drop it right there, and it's in the right location. We just need to get the angle correct now. So I'm finished with that. If I had made that a group, there wouldn't be any place to get it after I deleted it, but I was able to delete it because I didn't need it in the model space. All right, so let's bring in our layers window here, and I'm going to turn off the back support so that you can see more clearly what I'm doing. All right, so I've got the rotate tool now, and what I want to do is I want to rotate this component back so it's laying on that line. The way I'm going to get the tool set correctly is I'll click on the endpoint here and hold, and I'm dragging along the edge, which turns the protractor red in this case because that line is parallel to the red axis. And now I can come up along the face and come back until it drops onto that edge. And now that slat is in place on that line. If I bring back the back supports, you can see that I've now got that positioned correctly. All right, we'll delete that line because we're finished with that. And now we need to move on to the next part. I don't need the hidden geometry to be visible anymore, so we'll turn that off. By the way, I have a keyboard shortcut set for that. So I've opened this top component for editing and selected that arc at the top, and I'm going to right-click on it and choose Point at Center, which unfortunately drops off on my menu here, but it's there. And it creates a guide point out here in space. That Point at Center comes from a plugin that's available on the extension warehouse. If you don't already have it, I'll have a link to it in the text. And there we'll do the same thing on the bottom edge of the lower one. The reason I'm doing this is I need to generate an axis for rotation, for making rotated copies of the slat, and that rotation axis isn't vertical and it's not parallel to this slat because these curves have different radii. The axis of rotation is actually that line there, that guideline. All right, so let's use that guideline and we'll make some copies here. And so I've selected the component that I want to copy, and I've got the rotate tool. Well, let's hit Control now and invoke that copy function, and then I'm just going to come to this lower guide point. Doesn't matter which one of these we use, but this one's convenient. And I'm going to click, and just like before, I'm going to drag along the guideline, and you see the protractor is turned black. Once it's done that, I get that online message. And you see there's a little red mark up here indicating that we're running along that line. I can let go of the mouse and then click. I'm going to click at the midpoint and drag a copy around here. And I know just from playing with this, I'm going to use 25 degrees. If you're doing your own design, you might have to figure out what that angle is, but I'll type 25. And then I'm going to hit the slash key, and if I did 2, just to show you this, you see it's placed 2 additional copies of the slat. That's probably a little wider spacing than I want here, so I'm going to change that to 3 additional copies, not including the center one. And we're done with that. Now, let's select that middle one, and we'll repeat this process. So again, click and drag, click on the midpoint. Actually, it doesn't even matter if you grab the midpoint, it's just easy that way. And whoops, I hit the control key just now, and we'll type 25 and hit enter, /3, and we now have all the back slats. Now these are all copies of the same component at this stage, and so we need to do something a little different here to make them curved on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick pairs of these and I'm going to choose Make Unique. There's Make Unique and Make Unique. And by the way, we're finished with our guideline and guide points, so we can get rid of that for the time being. Now, at this stage, I'm just going to draw on one of these, and I'm just going to draw an arc. This isn't the way I'm going to actually complete this, but what I want to show you is if that was the arc I was going to cut, you can see the other one gets the arc basically the wrong direction. So what I'll do is I'll flip each one of these along its red direction. You can see now that that's you don't see the change in the other ones, but now let's get rid of that line because that's not how we're going to use that. So there's our backrests. Now I'm going to make that curve, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Now let's put the arc on the top of our slats. And the way I'm going to do that is, again, I'm going to leverage something I can do with components here. Well, you can too. So I'm going to go to my in-model components library, and I'm going to find that new back slat. So this was the original new back slat that I made. And I just dropped it in here on this, at this intersection. It didn't really matter if we had an intersection there or not, but now I'm going to put in a couple of new guidelines. Actually, we can get rid of those two there. And I'm going to put one in here, 3/8 of an inch off of the edge in each direction. Because the slat is tapered, those guidelines intersect somewhere down, way down here. And what I'm going to do is select that component, and I want to make copies of it with the rotate tool again. Let's get down here, and there we go. What I need to do is hit the control key, and then I need to hover along here until I find that intersection, and I'll click. And then I'm going to come up along one guideline and copy over to the next guideline. And what that does is it leaves a space in between the slats. It's equal at the top to what I've got on the chair. And I'll hit enter, *3, or you could use X3. But now that's spaced those out. The spacing isn't exactly the same down at the bottom, but it'll be close enough for what we need to do here. And now I'm going to replace each of these 3 new components with the copies from before. And so I'll select this one here just to the left of the center, and in the in-model library here, I'll right-click on the thumbnail for the next slat over, which is slat number 1, new slat number 1, and I'll replace the selected. And I'll do that again. So select this one and right-click on new slat number 2 and new slat number 3. So if I, for example, open this one for editing, you can see it's the outer 2 slats on my seat over here in the chair. This one, it's the next 2 in. This one, the next 2 in, and the center. So when I edit these components here, the the slats in the chair will get edited at the same time. So the next thing I'm going to do is draw an arc, And I'm drawing that outside the components. Now this is the center component here, so I'm going to start at the midpoint. And I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily put this arc down here somewhere and then start drawing it out. Now I changed the number of segments to 48. And one thing I want to do here is I want to make sure I don't go above the curve or above the top of the slat as I've done here. I want to come down here. That's telling me it's tangent to the edge, which is perfect. So there's my curve for the slats. Now what I'll do is, again, this is outside of the component, so now I need to cut those off. And the way I'll do that is I'll use Control X to cut the arc. Then I'll open one of the slats for editing. Actually, I should back up for just a moment because I'm going to need to do something on the other side here. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that arc back. I do need the other bit of it on the other side here, and I'm going to copy this over here someplace. We can just use scale in this case and while I'm holding the control key, I just made a mirror here, hit -1. And now let's bring that baby in there, and we'll put that right there. Okay, so now I've got that whole arc drawn all the way across. I only need a little bit of it on this side, but we'll use the Control X to cut. I'll open this component for editing and use Edit Paste in Place, for which I've got a keyboard shortcut made. And I can use push-pull. There we go. Push-pull. We'll soften that edge up there, and we'll delete what we don't need on the other side, off the side. So that's now got a little shallow curve on it. Let's repeat the process here. So we can erase those and switch to push-pull and double-click and cut that one off. Repeat the process. So erase what we don't need and push-pull. And the final one. And this time we only have to delete on this one side and push-pull again. And there's our curve. And we're finished with all of that stuff, so we'll delete it. Zoom extents. There's the curve cut on the back slats. Let's do this. We'll bring the rest of the chair back. I'm going to first make a new layer. We'll call it New Back Slats. And I'm going to put all of those components on that layer. And then we'll turn on the rest of our layers here that we need. So the rear stretcher, front stretcher, the uprights, seat slats, corbels, rear legs, front legs, and arms. And there, now you'll notice if I turn on my original back slats, they have a different curve than the one I just drew. I actually kind of like that one better. But there you have it.